A black belt instructor humiliated the quiet cleaning woman in front of his class and dared her daughter to step onto the mat as a joke. Seconds later, one open palm dropped him to his knees and a smirk drained from his face. "Step away from my mother." The words did not come from Diane Carter, the cleaner standing frozen with a mop in her hands, but from her 13-year-old daughter, Maya, who had just walked through the door of the Iron Crane Dojo with her school backpack still slung over one shoulder. Derek Cole, the black belt instructor and owner who had moments earlier mocked Diane in front of a room full of students, turned slowly with a grin already curling at the corner of his mouth. "What did you say, little girl?" "You hurt me." "Apologize to her." The dojo went silent. 24 students shifted on the mat, eyes flicking from the towering instructor to the small girl in jeans and a faded gray sweatshirt. A child had just challenged a man who believed himself untouchable inside his own kingdom. What happened next would leave that entire room unable to breathe. This is the story of how a silent girl guarding her grandfather's secret changed everything with a single strike, and how the man she humiliated would look into her eyes and whisper 4 words that no one expected. "I know that face." Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now, let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A quiet girl's promise to her grandfather was about to be broken. For 12 years, her family's secret had been kept safe behind a folded gray belt and a faded photograph. But tonight, in front of a crowd of strangers, that secret would rise up to defend the one person she loved most in the world. The scent of clean sweat and lemon floor wax filled the Iron Crane Dojo. It was a place of discipline, a temple built around the worship of strength. On the far wall, framed photographs of past tournament champions stared down with hard, unsmiling faces. Below them, a long shelf of polished trophies gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, each one angled just so to catch the eye of anyone who walked in. The late evening hour was usually a comfort to Diane Carter, a soft pocket of silence after the noise of the day had drained away. At 46, Diane moved with a quiet efficiency that made her nearly invisible. For the past 4 months, she had been the dojo's cleaner, the woman who arrived just as the last class was finishing, her gray uniform blending into the shadows along the edges of the room. She would wait patiently for the students to gather their bags before she began her work, transforming the space from a theater of grunts and impacts back into a spotless, gleaming hall. She took pride in her work. The wooden floor had never shone so warmly, the mirrors never been so free of streaks. But tonight was different. Tonight, Derek Cole had decided to stay late. He stood at the center of the mat with his arms crossed over a chest that strained the fabric of his GI. His black belt nodded with the precise, arrogant symmetry of a man who studied his own reflection. He was 36 years old and built like something carved from oak, and he ran the Iron Crane the way a small king runs a small country, with the absolute certainty that everything inside its walls existed for his pleasure. His students stayed late not because they wanted to, but because Derek had announced an extra hour of conditioning, which mostly meant they would stand in painful stances while he walked among them, correcting with a sharp tongue and an occasional shove. He had already drawn blood that night, not real blood, but the kind that doesn't show. A boy of 14 named Cody had held his front stance a half-inch too high, and Derek had stopped the whole class to make an example of him. "Look at this," he'd said, kicking the inside of the boy's knee to drop his hips. "You've been coming here 2 years, and you still stand like a frightened deer. You want to know why you'll never test for your black belt? Because somewhere inside you know you don't deserve it." The boy's chin had trembled, and Derek had watched it tremble with open enjoyment before moving on. He believed in fear the way other instructors believed in repetition. Fear, he liked to say, was the fastest teacher there was. The students bowed when he passed, addressed him as sir, kept their eyes down, and counted the minutes until they could escape the smell of his approval and disapproval both. The ray, The bow that should have meant respect freely given had curdled in that room into the flinch of people bracing for the next blow. Diane had cleaned around the edges of plenty of cruel rooms in her life. She had learned to make herself small and quiet, to be a gray shape that mopped and dusted and saw nothing, and most nights it worked. But she felt the temperature of the iron crane that evening, the held-breath quality of it, the way the younger students glanced at the clock, and a part of her ached for them, even as another part of her kept her eyes carefully on the floor. Maya had texted her mother that she would walk over after her study group let out. Dan had asked her not to. The dojo was no place for a girl after dark, she'd said, and besides, the instructor did not like outsiders watching his classes. But Maya had insisted. She always worried when her mother worked the late shift alone, and she liked the half-mile walk home together through the quiet streets, the two of them sharing a single pair of earbuds and the last of whatever snack was in Maya's bag. So Maya had come anyway, slipping in through the glass door just as the trouble was beginning. It started, as cruelty often does, with something small. Diane had set down her bucket near the trophy shelf and reached up with a soft cloth to dust the lowest row. Her elbow caught the edge of a tall acrylic trophy, regional champion, heavyweight division, with Derek's name laser-cut into the base. The trophy wobbled, tipped, and slid off the shelf. Diane lunged and caught it an inch from the floor, but the sudden movement knocked over her bucket, and a wide gray tongue of soapy water spread across the polished mat where, moments before, Derek had been demonstrating a kata. The room held its breath. Derek turned. For a long moment, he simply looked at the spreading water, then at the woman crouched on the floor with his trophy clutched against her chest. And then he smiled, and the smile was worse than any shout. "Well," he said, loud enough for every student to hear, "look at that. The help has gone and made a mess on my floor." Diane scrambled to her feet, setting the trophy carefully back on its shelf. "I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident. I'll have it dry in 2 minutes, I promise." An accident. Derek strolled toward her, unhurried, savoring the moment. "You know, I've been meaning to have a word with you. My students train on this mat. They bleed on it. They earn the right to stand on it. And you walk in here with your little bucket and your little cloth and you think you belong in the same room?" He stopped a foot away from her and looked down. "Do you even know what discipline is? What honor is? Or did life just hand you a mop and call it a career?" A few of the students laughed. They laughed because they were afraid not to, because they had all stood where Diane was standing now, on the wrong end of Derek Cole's attention, and they were grateful tonight it was someone else. Diane's face burned, but she kept her eyes low and her voice level. "I just cleaned the floors, sir. I'll get out of your way." No. Derek held up a hand. "I think you should learn something while you're here. I think everybody should." He turned to his class, spreading his arms like a showman. "You see, people like our friend here spend their whole lives running from things, from hard work, from responsibility, from a fight." He looked back at Diane, and something ugly glittered in his eyes. "Tell you what, you want to keep this job? Step on the mat. Show me you've got even a little bit of fight in you. 1 round. Go easy on you and everything. Sir, please." "I don't fight. I'm just here to—" "Of course you don't," Derek laughed. "You don't do anything, do you? Just like the rest of them." That was the moment the glass door eased open and a small figure in jeans and a gray sweatshirt stepped quietly into the room. That was the moment Maya saw her mother's bowed head and the wet shine of humiliation in her eyes, and felt something cold and old wake up inside her chest. "Step away from my mother." Now the whole room was looking at her, this small, thin girl with her backpack and her wide, calm eyes, standing in the doorway as if she had every right to be there. Derek's grin widened. He had found a new toy. "And who," he said, "is this?" "That's my daughter," Diane said quickly, panic rising in her voice. "Maya, baby, go wait outside. Please, go on now." But Maya did not move. She set her backpack down against the wall, slow and deliberate, and looked at Derek cold the way a person looks at a problem they have already solved in their head. Apologize to her, Maya said again. And we'll go. Derek looked from the mother to the daughter and back again, and then he threw his head back and laughed, a big, booming laugh that bounced off the trophies and the mirrors. Oh, this is too good, he said. The little one's got more spine than the mother. All right, sweetheart. Here's the deal. You want me to apologize? You earn it. Same offer I gave your mama. 1 round on the mat. You last 30 seconds against me. I'll get down on my knees and apologize to the both of you in front of everybody. He spread his arms wide and grinned at his students. But when you can't and you won't, you both walk out that door and don't come back. New cleaning lady starts Monday. Derek. One of the older students, a young man of maybe 18 with watchful eyes and a brown belt, stepped forward. His name was Daniel, and he had been the only one in the room not laughing. She's a kid. Come on. This isn't... Stay in your lane, Daniel. Derek didn't even look at him. I'm teaching a lesson. Maya looked at her mother. Diane was shaking her head, mouthing the word no, her hands twisting the wet cloth into a knot. And in that instant, Maya was no longer in the dojo. She was 9 years old, in a small, neat backyard, on a sunny afternoon that smelled of cut grass and the iron tang of the old man's hand resting on her shoulder. She remembered her grandfather's voice, low and gravelly, the voice that could quiet a room without rising. The backyard had been his whole world by then. A square of grass behind a small clapboard house, a single dogwood tree, a row of roses he tended like patience. He had laid an old square of canvas on the lawn for their lessons, and the canvas smelled of rain and rubber, and the WD-40 he used on the shears. He never wore a GI to teach her. Just a white undershirt and gardening trousers, his forearms ropey and scarred in ways she had never thought to ask about. The skill I'm teaching you is not a toy, Maya, he had said, folding her small fists into the proper shape, one knuckle leading. It is not for showing off. It is not for winning trophies. Most men learn to fight so they can take. You will learn so you can guard. He had crouched down then, until his eyes were level with hers, and there had been something terribly serious in them, something that had outlived whatever war he never spoke of. A strong person who guards is the most beautiful thing in the world. A strong person who takes is the ugliest. There is no third kind. You choose, every single day, which one you are. How will I know, she had asked, in the way of 9-year-olds, if I'm guarding or taking? He had smiled at that, the rare smile that creased his whole weathered face. You'll know because guarding costs you something and you do it anyway. Taking feels good, guarding feels heavy. If it ever feels good to hurt someone, child, you stop. That feeling is not yours. That feeling belongs to men I have known, and you are not going to become them. He had pressed his broad palm flat on the top of her head, the way he always did, as if he were planting something there. Promise me, you'll only use what I give you to protect someone who cannot protect themselves, a person who has no one else. Promise me that, and I will teach you everything I know. And she had promised. She had been so proud, so sure she understood. For 4 years she had kept that promise locked away, even after he was gone, the way she kept his gray belt folded in her drawer with his photograph tucked inside it. She had never once used what he taught her. Not against the boys at school who pulled her braids. Not against the older girl who shoved her into the lockers in 7th grade. She had simply absorbed it all and walked away, and walking away had never once felt like losing because he had taught her that too. But here now was a person who could not protect herself. A person who had no one else. Maya bent down and unlaced her sneakers, set them neatly side by side at the edge of the mat, and stepped out onto the tatami in her socks. The firm give of it under her feet felt like a memory. Maya, no. Diane breathed. It's okay, Mom. Maya said quietly. Just watch the door. Until now, Maya had been nothing but the invisible daughter of the woman who mopped the floors. Derek Cole, the black belt, had offered the fight as a cruel joke. But what no one in that room knew, not the laughing students, not the smirking instructor, not even her terrified mother, was that this quiet girl had been trained, hour after patient hour, by a man whose name had once been spoken in lowered voices by very dangerous people. And now, standing barefoot at the center of the mat, she was about to remind a room full of strangers what the word honor actually meant. Daniel had stepped back to the wall, but he hadn't taken his eyes off Maya. There was something about the way she stood that bothered him, not the nervous stiffness of a child playing tough, but a loose, weightless stillness, hands relaxed at her sides, knees barely bent. He had seen that stance exactly once before, in an old grainy training video his own first sensei used to show, the one of the legendary instructor whose lineage Daniel's own school claimed to descend from. He told himself he was imagining it. A kid couldn't stand like that. Derek rolled his thick neck until it cracked, bounced on the balls of his feet, and bowed mockingly low. "Whenever you're ready, princess." He came in fast. For all his bulk, Derek Cole could move, and he led with his signature attack, a heavy front kick aimed at the midsection, the kind that had folded grown men in half during tournaments. The students had seen it 100 times. It never missed. The sound of it cutting the air was a low, ugly whoosh, and someone near the wall winced in anticipation of the impact. But the kick never landed. Just as his foot was about to connect, Maya shifted her weight. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible, a slight rotation of her hips that took her body 2 inches off the line of the attack. She felt the wind of it brush the front of her sweatshirt, warm and fast, and then it was past her, and the momentum of the missed kick carried Derek a half step forward, off balance, his planted foot squeaking on the polished mat. He recovered quickly. He was too experienced not to, but there had been a moment, just a flicker, where the man who owned this dojo had stumbled in front of everyone who feared him. The room went very quiet. The laughter that had filled it a minute ago was gone. Somewhere near the back, a student let out a long breath he'd been holding, and the sound of it was loud in a new silence. "Lucky," Derek muttered, more to himself than to anyone. But his eyes had narrowed, and the showman's grin had tightened at the corners. He set his feet again, and this time he led with his hands, a sharp jab to measure the distance, then a heavy cross thrown straight from the shoulder, fast and mean, meant to end things before they could become embarrassing. Maya did not block, she did not retreat. She simply was not where the punches were. Her head moved an inch to the left, then an inch to the right, a small swaying motion like a reed bending in slow water. And Derek's fists found nothing but air both times, while she watched his face the entire while with those calm, unhurried eyes, as though she were reading a clock. "Your movements are too wide," Maya said. Her voice was soft, conversational, but in the silence it carried to every corner of the room. "You telegraph everything with your shoulders." "I knew where that punch was going before you did." A ripple went through the watching students. Someone whispered, "Did she just?" and was hushed. Derek's jaw worked. He reset, slower this time, trying to remember the discipline that had once won him those trophies on the wall, and threw a tight combination. Jab, jab, hook. The way a real fighter does. It was better. It was almost good. And Maya slipped all 3 of them. The first 2 with those small tilts of the head and the hook by simply leaning back from the waist, so that his knuckles passed a finger's width from her chin. "Better," she said, as if grading a homework problem. "But your weight is still on your back foot when you hook. You're punching to be seen, not to land." He used to call that fighting for the mirror. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she felt the old grief rise with them, but Derek didn't catch the reference. "Not yet." "Whoever taught you," Maya went on quietly, stopped before he finished. Something flickered across Derek's face at that. Not understanding. Not yet. But a flinch, the way a man flinches when a stranger says a thing only one dead person used to say. Then the rage drowned it. "You little." He abandoned form entirely now, charging in with a wild flurry of punches capped by a looping haymaker that could have broken a board. Maya bent backward at the waist, let the haymaker pass over her face by an inch. She felt the heat of his forearm and smelled the sour adrenaline coming off him. And as Derek's arm swung through empty space, she tapped him, almost gently twice on the exposed ribs with two stiffened fingers. Tap, tap, not a strike. A correction. A way of saying, I could have 3 times over, and I chose not to. That was when the laughter died completely. That was when the room understood it was watching something impossible. Daniel's mouth had gone dry. He knew that swaying defense. He knew those 2-finger taps. They were in the old video. They belonged to one man, one school, one name his sensei had spoken with something close to reverence. It can't be, he thought. She's a child. But his heart was hammering because the body did not lie. And this child's body knew things that took most fighters 30 years to learn. Until now, the students of the Iron Crane had believed their instructor was the strongest person they had ever seen. They had watched him humble a cleaning woman for sport. But what none of them had grasped until this exact moment was that the small girl dancing untouched around their master had been forged by a man who fought in places that don't appear on any map, and now with the room frozen in disbelief, she was about to finish what she had been forced to start. Derek Cole had stopped thinking. Humiliation had burned away whatever discipline he'd ever had, and now there was only rage. He let out a roar, not a proper kai-ai, just the bellow of a cornered animal, and lunged at Maya with both hands, a desperate, telegraphed grab meant to overpower her with sheer mass, to pin this impossible child to the mat and make the nightmare stop. Maya did not retreat. She moved inside the attack. Her left hand shot out, open-palmed, and met Derek's descending right arm at the wrist, deflecting it harmlessly across her body. At the exact same instant, her right hand moved. It was a blur, too fast for the eye to track. She did not aim for his head. She did not aim for his chest. She aimed for a single specific point, just below the arch of his ribs, the solar plexus, her fingers held stiff and straight, her whole small body torquing behind the strike the way a door slams behind a gust of wind. The blow landed with a sound that was not loud, but was sharp and final, like a dry stick snapping in a quiet room. Derek Cole froze. His entire body went rigid. His eyes flew wide, his mouth opened, and absolutely nothing came out. The strike had driven the air from his lungs and short-circuited the nerve cluster beneath his sternum. And for one full terrible second, the strongest man in the room could not move and could not breathe. His knees buckled. He went down, not in a dramatic crash, but in a slow, helpless fold, sinking to the mat in front of his own students. One hand pressed to his middle, his lips working soundlessly like a fish pulled from water. Maya stepped back, calm, composed. She let her hands fall to her sides and stood over the gasping instructor, without a trace of triumph on her face, only a kind of quiet, tired sadness, the look of someone who had broken something she had hoped never to break. The silence in the Iron Crane dojo was total. 20-some students stood rooted to the spot, water bottles forgotten in their hands. Diane Carter had both palms pressed over her mouth. "Does anyone else," Maya said softly into that silence, "want a lesson?" No one moved. No one breathed. And then Derek Cole, still on his knees, still struggling for air, finally lifted his head and looked up at the girl standing over him. And as he looked at her face, really looked, at the set of her jaw and the shape of her eyes and the particular calm in them, something changed in his expression. The rage drained out of it. The pain seemed to fall away. What replaced it was not anger and not even shame. It was something far stranger. It was recognition. His face went pale. His mouth, which a moment ago could not find air, found one ragged whisper. "I know that face," he breathed. "Oh God, I know that face." Maya went still. "You're..." Derek swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving hers. Those eyes, that guard. "The way you..." He shook his head slowly, as if trying to wake from a dream. Who taught you to fight, girl? Who was he? Tell me his name. Maya did not answer. But her silence and the flicker of something fierce and protective that crossed her face told Derek everything he could not bear to know. It's not possible, he whispered. He pressed his hand harder against the floor, as though the world had tilted beneath him. He's gone. He's been gone for years. I went to the... He stopped. He looked at the gray-uniformed woman by the wall, at her face, and then back at the girl, and the math of it assembled itself behind his eyes in slow, sickening pieces. Carter, he breathed. Your last name is Carter. Maya's voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. Eli Carter was my grandfather. For a long moment, Derek Cole said nothing at all. He stayed on his knees on the mat of his own dojo, a black belt felt by a 13-year-old, staring at the granddaughter of a man he had once called, with his whole young heart, sensei. For just an instant, the arrogance fell away from his face entirely, and underneath it Maya saw something she had not expected. A young man, hungry and lost, standing in a garage that smelled of cut grass and machine oil, being shown a gentleness he did not know how to accept. Derek had walked into Eli Carter's life broken in a way he'd never had words for, and the old man had tried to give him the one thing that might have healed it. And Derek had taken the techniques and run from the healing, because the healing asked him to become small enough to be saved, and he had not been brave enough for that. Everything he had built since then, the dojo and the trophies and the kingdom of fear, had been a wall against that memory. And now a child with his master's eyes had walked through the wall as though it were made of paper. For one breath, Derek looked as though he might weep. Then the moment passed, and the man hardened over the boy again like ice closing over water. And what came next would prove that some people, given a chance to be saved, will burn down the world rather than say they are sorry. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you are doing while listening, maybe relaxing after a long shift, on a late-night drive, or just winding down before sleep. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And while you're there, tell me honestly, if someone had humiliated your mother in front of a crowd of strangers, would you have stepped onto that mat or walked away? Diane took Maya by the hand and led her off the floor without a word. They gathered the backpack and the sneakers in a rush, and the glass door swung shut behind them, and the night air outside felt very cold after the heat of all those eyes. They walked the half-mile home in a silence broken only once, near the corner of their street, when Diane stopped under a flickering streetlight and pulled her daughter into a heart-shaking embrace. You promised him, Diane said into Maya's hair. Your grandfather. You promised you'd never. He told me to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Maya's voice cracked for the first time all night. You couldn't protect yourself in there, Mom. You shouldn't have had to. Diane held her tighter and didn't argue. But that night, lying awake in the dark, Maya stared at the ceiling and felt the cold weight of the broken promise settle onto her chest. She got up, opened her drawer, and took out the folded gray belt. Eli Carter's belt, worn so thin at the fold that it had gone soft as cloth. The black long ago faded to the gray of old ash. Tucked inside it was the photograph, her grandfather as a younger man, lean and unsmiling, in a plain white GI with no decoration of any kind, standing in front of a dojo whose name she had never been able to read. She pressed her palm flat against the warm belt, the way he used to press his palm flat against the top of her head, and she breathed in slow until the tightness in her chest loosened. I'm sorry, Grandpa, she whispered. I had to. She told herself it was over. She was wrong. It was only beginning. Derek Cole did not sleep that night, and when the sun came up, he was not a humbled man. He was a frightened one, and frightened men with power are the most dangerous kind. By morning, the story had already escaped the walls of the Iron Crane. One of his students, a cocky 17-year-old named Trent, the kind who recorded everything, had filmed the last 10 seconds of the fight on his phone and shown it to a friend, who showed it to another. And by noon, a shaky clip of a small girl dropping a grown black belt to his knees had begun to circulate in the town's group chats with captions like, "Who is this kid?" But Trent's video had cut off before Derek's whispered words, and that suited Derek fine. What Derek could not stand was not the loss, it was the recognition. It was the way the girl's face had reached across 20 years and dragged him back to the worst thing he had ever done. And as long as Eli Carter's granddaughter and her mother stayed in this town, that face would be out there, reminding him. So Derek did what cowards do. He decided that if he could not undo his shame, he would bury the people who reminded him of it. It started with the phone calls. Diane cleaned 3 buildings besides the dojo, a dental office, a small accounting firm, and a chain pharmacy 2 towns over. Within a week, she had lost 2 of them. The dental office manager wouldn't quite say why, just mumbled something about going a different direction. But the accountant was more honest because he was an old friend. "Diane, I'm sorry," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I got a call. Man said you've been let go from a place for theft. Said there were complaints. I told him I never had a problem, but the partners got nervous. You know how it is." He pressed an extra week's pay into her hand. "For what it's worth, I don't believe a word of it." Diane believed she knew exactly where the calls had come from. So did Maya. And Maya, who had spent her whole life learning to read the truth in a person's shoulders and hands, recognized the shape of what was happening. The instigator had planted the seed, the amplifiers were spreading it, and soon enough it would reach the kind of authority that could take away everything. She had been right about that too. 2 weeks after the fight, a letter arrived from the landlord. The rent had been late once, just once, the month Diane's hours got cut. But the letter spoke of ongoing concerns and complaints from the community and gave them 30 days to find somewhere new. Someone had been talking to the landlord. Someone had been busy. Maya found her mother sitting at the kitchen table that evening with a letter in front of her and her face in her hands. And the guilt that rose up in Maya then was worse than anything she had ever felt. "I did this," Maya said. "If I'd just walked away like you said." "Don't." Diane's voice was sharp. "Don't you dare carry this. That man was going to be cruel to somebody no matter what. You didn't make him cruel. He was born that way and chose to stay that way." But her hands were trembling, and Maya saw the fear underneath the anger, and the guilt sank its hooks in deeper. That night, Maya took out the belt and the photograph again, and this time she did not just press her palm to it. She unfolded it carefully and looked at the man in the picture for a long, long time, and she let herself remember everything she usually kept locked away. His name was Eli Carter. To the world, he had been a quiet man, a retired groundskeeper who tended the roses behind a county courthouse and never raised his voice and never spoke of where he'd been. He went to church on Sundays. He fixed the neighbors' fences for free. He could sit on his porch for an entire afternoon and say no more than 3 sentences, and the neighborhood children loved him without quite knowing why. But before all of that, he had been Sergeant Elijah Carter, a member of a small and highly specialized unit whose work was never written down and never spoken about, in places whose names had been classified before Maya's mother was even born. He had been sent to learn the fighting arts of half a dozen countries, not as a tournament competitor, but as a man who needed every possible way to come home alive. And he had been so good at it that, for a few years after he left the service, the kind of people who collected dangerous men had tried very hard to collect him. He had refused them all. He had hung up the uniform, picked up a pair of garden shears, and spent the rest of his life trying to become as gentle as he had once been lethal. The fighting he taught Maya was not the showy, percussive style of the tournament circuit. It was older and quieter and far more frightening, built on a single principle he repeated until it lived in her bones: never meet force with force. Water doesn't argue with the rock, he would say. It goes around, and in 1,000 years the rock is gone and the water is still there. He taught her to read shoulders and hips and the small tells in a person's breathing, to be wherever the attack was not, to end a confrontation in one motion, so that no second motion was ever needed. The longer a fight lasts, he told her, the more chances you have to become cruel. A short fight is a mercy. The shortest fight is the one that never starts. He made her walk away from 100 imaginary fights for every one he let her finish. And he watched her face each time to make sure she was learning the difference between a person who could fight and a person who wanted to. And once, long ago before Maya was born, he had taken on a single student. A hungry, gifted, arrogant young man who had walked into his garage dojo wanting to learn how to be unbeatable. Eli had tried to teach him the only lesson that mattered, that the strong exist to shield the weak, not to rule them. The young man had taken the techniques and left a lesson behind. He had vanished one day with half of what Eli had to give and none of his soul, and he had used those skills to build a reputation and a business and a small cruel kingdom of his own. Maya had heard her grandfather mention that student exactly once, near the end, when the medicine made him talk in his sleep. "I taught him to fight," the old man had murmured, "and I never taught him to be a man. That's the one I failed." She had not understood it then. She understood it now. The student had a name. The name was Derek Cole. "Your grandfather built a shield," Maya whispered to the photograph. "And Derek turned it into a sword. And now he's using it on us." She folded the belt back up and set it on her pillow. "I'm not going to let him." The next morning, she went to find the one person in that dojo who hadn't laughed. Daniel was easy to find. He all but worked at the coffee shop near the community college, hunched over textbooks at the same corner table every afternoon. When Maya slid into the seat across from him, he wasn't surprised. He'd been half expecting her. "I quit," he said before she could speak. "The dojo, day after." Couldn't stand there anymore. He turned a paper cup in his hands. "That stance you used. The two-finger taps. The deflection and counter, all in one motion." He looked up. "That's Carter, the real thing. My first sensei trained under a man who trained under your grandfather. There's a video. Half the people who study this stuff think it's a myth. You're not a myth. I need your help," Maya said. "Derek's trying to destroy my family. Phone calls, lies, getting my mom fired, getting us evicted. I can't fight that on a mat. There's no mat for that." She leaned forward. "But you know him. You know his students. You know how he moves through this town. And you've got a camera." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he set down the cup. "What do you need me to do?" What followed was 3 weeks of patient, careful work, and not 1 minute of it happened on a mat. Daniel and 2 other students who had quietly left the Iron Crane, sickened, it turned out, by what they'd watched Derek do, began to keep track of him. They were not breaking any laws. They simply noticed where he went and what he did, and when his behavior crossed a line, they made a record of it. Because Derek had not stopped at phone calls. Emboldened by the silence, certain that a cleaning woman and her daughter had no power to fight back, he had grown bolder. He drove past their building in the evenings, slow, headlights off, a dark shape behind the wheel. He parked across the street from the pharmacy 2 towns over and waited until Diane came out at the end of her shift, then pulled out behind her car and followed it for a few blocks, close enough that she could see his face in her rearview mirror before peeling away into the dark. Twice he came to the apartment door late at night and knocked 3 slow knocks and said nothing, and stood there breathing and left. He wanted them gone, and more than that, he wanted them to feel hunted until they ran on their own. He never noticed the brown sedan parked half a block back night after night. The first evening, Daniel almost lost his nerve. His hands shook on the wheel and his breath fogged the windshield, and he had to remind himself that all he was doing was watching, the way Derek watched, except that Daniel was watching to protect and Derek was watching to terrify, and that difference was the whole world. By the 3rd night he had a routine. He arrived before Derek did. He propped his phone on the dashboard with a folded receipt under it for the right angle. He logged the time on a notepad in the passenger seat. 10:47, headlights off, idling. 11:12, follows the gray Honda east on Fillmore. 11:40, knocks, waits, leaves. He never confronted the man. He never even let himself be seen. He simply gathered the truth, one cold, quiet hour at a time, until the truth was too heavy for any lie to lift. Over 11 nights, the footage stacked up, not a single dramatic moment, but a long, patient, undeniable record of a grown man stalking a child and her mother. The dates lined up. The license plate was clear. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone with eyes. "We could just take this to the police," Daniel said one night, scrolling through the footage. "We will," Maya said. But not yet. She had learned something from her grandfather that had nothing to do with fighting. The patient ones win. If we go now, it's our word against his, and he's a respected business owner and we're the cleaning lady and her weird kid. He'll lie. He'll say he was just driving home, just out for a walk. He's good at lying. He's been doing it his whole life, pretending to be something he's not. She looked at the screen. We need him to lie where everyone can see it. We need him to dig his own hole in public, and then we hand the police the shovel. Until now, Maya had been the quiet girl who'd embarrassed a black belt and paid for it dearly. Derek had turned his shame into a weapon and aimed it at the only thing she couldn't dodge, her mother's livelihood, her family's roof. But what Derek had forgotten in all his rage was that the old man who trained him had also trained the girl, and that Eli Carter's deadliest lesson had nothing to do with his hands. And now, with the evidence gathered and the trap baited, Maya was about to teach Derek Cole the one technique he had never bothered to learn from their shared master, patience. So Maya set the trap. The town had a community forum, one of those local message boards where people argued about parking and praised the high school football team and warned each other about coyotes. The clip of the fight had been making the rounds there for weeks, and the comments had split into camps. Some called it fake. Some called Maya dangerous, and some Derek students mostly, posting under thin disguises, had been busy painting a very particular picture, that the violent girl and her shady mother had been run out of 3 jobs for cause, that the family was trouble, that good people should stay away. Maya, with Daniel's help, made one post. It was calm and it was clear, and it gave no details about the fight at all. It simply said that a local family was being harassed and stalked by a man who couldn't accept being embarrassed, that this man had made false calls to their employers and threatened their housing, and that anyone who knew the truth was welcome to share it. It named no one. It begged no one. It just opened a door. And Derek Cole, who could not leave a thing alone, walked right through it. He could not help himself. Watching strangers question his version of events drove him into a fury. And from an account that was barely disguised at all, he typed a long, seething reply. He wrote that he had never contacted anyone's employer, that he had never been near the family's home, that he didn't even know where they lived, that the whole thing was a fantasy invented by a vindictive child and her unstable mother to cover for the fact that they were thieves and liars who'd been fired for theft from his own business and others. He wrote it all down, dated and public, for the whole town to read. He lied about every single thing, and he lied loudly. He had just dug the hole. Maya handed over the shovel. The next post on the forum was Daniel's. It was short. It contained the footage, time-stamped, dated, undeniable. The brown sedan idling outside the family's building at 11 at night. The same sedan trailing Diane's car from the pharmacy. The figure at the apartment door in the small hours, knocking and walking away. And, because Daniel had done his work well, a clear shot of the license plate, and another of Derek's face, lit by the dashboard glow, watching a woman walk to her car alone in the dark. A man who claimed he didn't know where they lived. A man who claimed he'd never been near them. There it all was. The forum went quiet for about an hour. And then it did not go quiet again for a long time. The same people who had spread the rumors now turned on the man who'd started them. Diane's old employer, the accountant, came forward and posted that yes, he'd received an anonymous call accusing Diane of theft, and that he now understood where it had come from, and that he was ashamed he'd ever doubted her. The dental office manager came forward too, and so did the office manager at a building Diane had cleaned years ago, who said she'd gotten the same call. A neighbor posted that she'd seen the dark sedan idling outside the building and had almost called the police herself. A mother of one of Derek's students wrote that her son had come home shaking after class more than once, and that she told herself it was just tough love, and that she would never tell herself that again. Cody's parents pulled him from the dojo the next morning. One by one, the small silences that had let Derek operate for years cracked open, and out of them came the same realization, repeated in a dozen voices. We all saw pieces of this, and we all looked away. The rumor engine that Derek had built to destroy a family went into reverse and ran straight back over him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it, because the truth, once it was finally let out, turned out to be much stronger than any lie he could tell. He posted twice more, first denying the footage was him, then deleting the account entirely when someone matched the license plate to his name on file with the business registry. By then it didn't matter. The town had stopped listening to him. The town had started listening at last to a cleaning woman and her quiet daughter. By the end of the week, the police had the footage. Stalking and harassment are not things a town's authorities can ignore once they are written down in timestamps and license plates, and a formal complaint was filed. There would be a protective order. There would be, the officers told Diane gently more after that. They had questions for several of his former employers, too, and a pattern of harassing phone calls is its own kind of crime. The Iron Crane Dojo lost more than half its students in a month. Parents do not leave their children with a man who stalks women in the dark. The trophy stayed on their shelf, gathering a thin film of dust no one bothered to wipe away, but the mat stayed empty, and the kai-ai shouts that had once rattled the windows fell silent. One gray morning, a for lease sign appeared in the window. Derek Cole did not stay to face the town that had finally seen him clearly. He packed up his perfect black belt and his polished trophies into the trunk of the brown sedan, and he left before dawn, not in handcuffs, not yet. Though the protective order and the open investigation meant that day might still come, but defeated as completely as a man can be, run out of town by nothing more than the truth and a 13-year-old who had refused to run first. Some of his old students stood across the street and watched him go, and not one of them bowed. Diane got her jobs back. The accountant called personally and apologized twice, once for the firing and once for not having defended her harder when it mattered. The dental office sent a written apology and a raise. The pharmacy 2 towns overheard the story and offered her a second building. The landlord, who had read the same forum as everyone else, quietly tore up the eviction notice and replaced it with a handwritten note that said only, "My mistake. You're welcome here as long as you like." For the first time in months, Diane slept through the night without listening for footsteps on the stairs. It should have felt like victory. For Maya, it did not entirely. One evening, a few weeks after the sign went up in the dojo window, Diane found her daughter sitting on the edge of her bed with the gray belt unfolded in her lap and tear tracks dried on her cheeks. "I broke my promise, Mom," Maya said. "Grandpa made me swear I'd only use it to protect people, and I keep telling myself that's what I did. But I dropped a man on his knees and I liked it for a second, and then I used everything he taught me to hunt another person down and take his whole life apart. That's not protecting. That's what Derek did. What if I'm just like him? What if I'm the thing Grandpa was afraid I'd become?" Diane sat down beside her and took the warm belt into her own hands, turning it over, feeling how soft the years had made it. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she found the photograph tucked inside and she looked at the lean, unsmiling young man in the plain white GI, and she smiled at him the way you smile at someone you miss. "Baby, do you know why your grandfather chose you?" she asked. He had 3 grandchildren. He could have taught any of you. He chose you because you were the only one who never wanted it. The others used to swing sticks around the yard pretending to be warriors. You just sit and watch the birds. She touched Maya's chin and turned her face up. He told me once, he said, that one will never use it unless she has no choice. That's the only kind of person you can trust with this. But you stepped onto that mat to stop a grown man from breaking your mother in front of a crowd. That's not a sword, Maya. That's a shield. Diane pressed the belt back into her daughter's hands. And when he came after us in the dark, you didn't go to that man's house. You didn't hurt him. You didn't even raise your voice. You stood in the light and you let the truth do the fighting. She wiped her own eyes. You were protecting me, baby. The whole time. You were being a shield, exactly like he taught you. He wouldn't be ashamed of you. He'd be so proud he couldn't stand it. Maya looked down at the belt in her hands, the gray of old ash soft as cloth, the photograph of the gentle, lethal man who had loved her enough to trust her with the most dangerous thing he owned. And the weight that had been sitting on her chest for weeks finally slowly lifted. Okay, she whispered. Okay, the seasons turned. The for-lease sign came down from the old iron crane, and something new went up in its place. Not a temple to strength, but a small free program in the community center 2 doors down, where on Saturday mornings a quiet 13-year-old girl began teaching neighborhood kids how to stand, how to breathe, how to fall without getting hurt, and how to walk away from a fight whenever walking away was possible. Daniel helped. So did the other students who had left the dojo. They didn't hand out belts. They didn't keep trophies. The only rule, painted in plain letters on the wall, was the one Eli Carter had given his granddaughter in a sunny backyard a lifetime ago. We learned this to guard, never to take. On the first Saturday, before the kids arrived, Maya unfolded the gray belt and laid it carefully along the top of the community center mirror where it caught the morning light. She set the photograph beneath it, the lean young man in his plain white GI looking out over the room. Then she stepped to the center of the mat, pressed her palm flat against her chest the way he used to press his palm flat against her head, and breathed in slow. This one's for you, Grandpa, she said softly, and bowed to the empty room. Diane watched from the doorway with her arms folded and her eyes shining. No longer the invisible woman in the gray uniform, but the mother of the girl who had reminded a whole town what real strength looks like. And the truth her daughter had proven, the truth her father had spent his whole quiet life trying to live, settled over both of them like the warm morning light. True strength is not measured by how hard you can strike. It is measured by how steadily you can stand in the light, with nothing in your hands but the truth, and how fiercely you are willing to use it to shield the people who have no one else. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comments section below. Thanks for spending this time with me. If this story moved you, write belt in the comments. This is a story from Underdog Dojo.